I've got an Australian story.
Never told anyone that before.
Never knew that now they were saying that online.
Wonder why I'm obsessed by fire.
I could tell my story.
Worms, these wild animals of the bush.
My ugly old town. I love it.
Yeah, well, that's my Australian story.
Hello, I'm Caroline Jones. Tonight's Australian story marks a dramatic turning point in the life of one of Australia's leading churchwomen. Reverend Dr. Dorothy McRae McMahon was, until very recently, the second most senior figure in the Uniting Church of Australia. Her work for social justice causes earned her the Human Rights Medal and a United Nations Peace Prize. Then, 3 months ago, at the age of 63, with marriage, 4 children and a most distinguished career behind her, she announced publicly at a national church assembly that she was a lesbian. Her announcement generated deep division within the church and forced her resignation as Director of Mission. Now she's fighting just to retain her ministry. In this program, for the first time, the minister, her children, her former husband and her new partner speak candidly about the painful coming out of Reverend Dr. Dorothy McRae McMahon.
When I ask myself, and I do ask myself, why I am a lesbian, I really believe that I always was and that I was born that way. I personally feel that I was created by God that way and that God has a great imagination and has in fact created lots of diversities, including this one. I believe in terms of the biblical thing, when people challenge me on that you should not call unclean anything that God has created. Well, I was born into a Methodist parsonage. Both my mother and my father were totally engaged in the church. Their whole life really was in the church. When I come back into Pitt Street, I remember the first time I stepped inside it. This was my first and only parish and as an ordained minister. I came here at the beginning of 1983, a few weeks after I was ordained, and stayed there for 10 years until the end of 1992. I think the greatest consequence in terms of my coming out was, in fact, that somebody then laid a charge of misconduct against me, the charge of conduct unbecoming a minister, and that threatens my ordination. I mean, the title of Reverend means nothing to me, but the recognition of particular gifts for ministry are quite important to me, and so I will find it very, very distressing if it's taken from me. There are times in our lives when we face an ending which seems to us like a death of hope for a relationship, a death of what we thought we saw as our future.
I think Dorothy made her mark in the church with her ministry at Pitt Street. What she did at Pitt Street was take a very run-down remnant of a congregation and built it up into a very active, noticeable congregation.
My sisters and brothers, good day.
Part of the ministry of the Pitt Street congregation was, first of all, on social issues. So that, sure, when Desmond Tutu came to Australia, he came to Pitt Street.
How we must solve our little problem.
And what she did in building up the congregation there, not necessarily wittingly, but she attracted, in effect, outcasts from a lot of other congregations, and that included the gay community, of course.
Yes, I think I've had a rigorous life journey. I married young. I went through 32 years of marriage, which were very important to me. I had 4 children. One of them was brain damaged. That was probably the greatest test of my faith when Christopher was brain damaged. He was our first son, and he was a beautiful, bright and lively child. And then at a little over 2, quite suddenly, he went into a total autistic withdrawal and never spoke again. I became quite angry with God about that, and I think that was very healthy. But nevertheless, I still had to then decide that nothing was going to change, and either I accepted that and still believed in a God of love, or I did not. And in the end, I decided that I did, and that even if I didn't understand why innocent people suffer, that still this God was giving me enough love and energy for us all to survive. In my early adult years, I was very active in the peace movement. Really, before we went into the Vietnam War, I was marching in Ban the Bomb marches in Melbourne, and then later on became very engrossed in the Vietnam War struggle, and from that moved into the women's movement, and then, of course, now into the gay and lesbian liberation movement.
Stop teaching men that they have a God-given right to dominate women.
The rest of my family also shared in much of that rigour, and we have all responded to it in our own ways in terms of our view of life and faith.
I don't go to church. I'm not really involved in the church in my life, and I don't have any particular faith. In my work, reading philosophy, you can't avoid, all those, metaphysical questions, and it's something that will always interest me from a philosophical point of view. I think a lot of people who have a Christian background have that slight sense of being in the world but not of it. That slight sense of distance, perhaps even a slight sort of pompousness. I like to stick pins in her because she sometimes can believe her own press, and I pull her up short whenever I think that she's being the public crusader with me or being a minister with me.
Okay, it's over now. And we go. Ooh. It was a difficulty for me when I was in my late teens, early 20s, because it was at a stage where I really was needing to sort of rebel and find my own identity, but it was sort of hard to rebel against this mum who always seemed to be one step more sort of radical and more groovy than what I was, so I couldn't even have the privilege of being in the younger, more groovy sort of generation rebelling. Sometimes I just want to scream to the world, in a sense, and say, look, she really is just nothing more and nothing less than a human being, and quite ordinary and normal. She can be great, but she can be very non-great and very ordinary, and she can be human in the not-so-virtuous ways, like she can be, she can hurt people, and she can be calculating, she can be power-hungry. She's not always human in the sort of open, frail sort of way. So that's something I feel I've had to carry almost to myself, because often the public image has been quite different.
Hey, there's no laughing in this song. This is not a Watch out, everyone.
Well, I basically got out of the church as soon as I could, really. From as early as I can remember, I really felt it just wasn't for me. My main memory is it was just too boring. There wasn't enough passion, there wasn't enough fun, and no real meaning for me. So I guess you could say music is my religion.
Laugh, laugh, Mr. Tiddalick, drinking all the water we want heading back. And the water came back. Oh, yes.
I guess what turned me off was a lot of the attitudes that are still coming out now, in relation with Mum. Central to my problem with the church is, the whole idea that there was some God up there or over there or anywhere who could be bothered judging this person or that person according to what they did. I just remember being really young and thinking, How on earth do you expect me to believe that?
I didn't know until I was almost 50 that I was a lesbian. I think I had an inkling probably about 10 years before I ended the marriage. I just had a sort of a feeling. And then at Pitt Street also, halfway through my ministry, there were a number of gay and lesbian people in the congregation. And I found myself fighting very fiercely for them, and then deep down realising that I was fighting for myself. And then I met a particular woman and realised, yes, I was quite deeply attracted to women. Yep, and there is a whole group of men.
Another excuse to write letters to the Herald.
Yeah, it's true. It was the toughest time in my whole life, no doubt about that. I felt as though I was going to fall over the edge of a cliff because I had a very strong sense of myself as a married woman. That may sound strange, but that was my persona, and I had always had a sense of myself as a person who keeps vows too, and as a Christian woman, one who doesn't break up marriages, especially when there are children. And so it took me some time to think about whether I could face that, but in the end I could do no other, because in the end it was, again, one of those situations where you begin to die if you don't live.
I like to think that Dorothy was not driven to do what she did because of something too bad about the marriage. I like to think that our marriage was a fair average quality marriage, and that Dorothy has moved the way she has through her own development. Losing your wife to another woman is in a sense easier. There's a sense in which it's end of contest. There's not much more you can say there. So that I don't think the shock was greater, but let's be clear, I don't think anyone enjoys divorce, so that it's an unhappy time for all parties, every party. But I don't think the trauma was worse because Dorothy was, launching out as a lesbian.
My immediate thought was how glamorous, how interesting, what a great line I've now got to say to people, my mother's a lesbian minister. But I think I felt more that a veil had been lifted on the past. When they separated, I had to sort of, look back and, raised up a whole lot of questions about how their relationship had been for years. And I can't say that it robbed me of an illusion of a happy marriage, because I think I'd perhaps always sensed that there was something not quite right.
I think that was one of the main difficult things, that Mum suddenly making a big statement about her sexuality was confronting, in that I didn't really think of my mum as a sexual being before that point. So, suddenly her identity being about what turns her on, who she's attracted to, what she loves, it was just sort of, my mum, my mum's not about sexuality and passion and all that stuff. She's just mum who's, mums are meant to be sexless or something, or that's how I perceived mum, so it was confronting on that level.
I can well imagine that my children, at the point where I was talking about being a lesbian, were confronted with the fact that their mother was sexually active. But on the other hand, I'd also say, what a good thing for kids to realise that older people are sexual beings and that we don't die all through as we get older. And after all, I was only around 50 then, but even now I like to think of myself as a sexual being and, as a person for whom life holds all the joys and all the excitements, as long as I'm an able-bodied person. I can't believe how many speeches there are now, would you? My relationship with Ali is really terrific. Imagine waiting till you're nearly 60 to find the best relationship that you've ever had in terms of a primary relationship, and think that you're heading into your old age in newness and freshness and courage and truth. That's good.
Yeah, it's really sort of difficult to say, I think, what attracts you to someone as a partner rather than a friend, but I think the first thing I noticed was her incredible warmth. And another thing that had really attracted me to her was her interest in people, you know, her capacity to listen to what you have to say and to be interested. And there was just something quite charismatic about her as a person, very unassuming, but nevertheless that she still had that charismatic sense about her.
In a funny way, I'd always sort of thought, geez, I must live in the most stable, boring, predictable family on earth, and finally something's happening that's a bit different. I think I'm sort of notorious for having said something like, oh, well, my God, I thought you'd never get round to it, as in leaving the marriage. You know, I was aware of a bit of tension there, a few problems there, and probably for a long time.
Yum, 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 yum.
I honestly don't remember being shocked or anything. All I can remember, honestly, is just feeling, well, that's great, you know, if you're feeling love and happiness, I don't care who it's with.
It's not sort of, you know, leather bar style dyke sort of lesbianism. It's much more sort of, you know, cups of tea and fluffy cats and dogs called Radcliffe sort of lesbianism. I mean, the word I think of is soft, sort of. To me, it's all bound up with a whole sort of aesthetic. Yeah, sort of caring, sharing, affirming each other, support group sort of lesbianism, which didn't appeal to me at all.
I think there would have been many complex things that our children faced, perhaps particularly our daughters.
There's Mummy and Dad. There's Mummy. Oh, hello. There's Mummy. Oh, yes, and there's all your friends in there.
They were close to me, and here I was relating closely and excitedly to another woman. And that would have felt a very different experience from the one that they would have experienced in the relationship between me and Barry. A quite different style of relationship, and one which they would have had a big adjustment to make.
Come on, Chris. Come on. Oh, yes. Going to come for a ride in the car? Yes. Good. Come on.
Ali has made a marvellous entry into my family. One of the areas that I feel very good about is that Ali has been most willing to come with me and take Christopher out on the odd occasions when we take him for a drive. The fact that she is a nurse makes me feel confident about doing that in a way that I haven't felt before. It was a very big decision to put Christopher into a hospital, into full-time residential care. We did it after the point when he was 16 years old, and I felt I had given 16 years of my life to him, which I don't regret. If I think of my life story, a whole group of people who have given me my life are the staff of Marsden Rehabilitation Centre, where he's lived for more than 20 years. I don't think they will ever know what that has meant to me. I would not have had a life to explore if they had not had the vocation to care for children and young people, and now men like Christopher. And that has been a gift to me that I couldn't even imagine ever compensating them for.
Hi, can I help you? 2 large Coke without ice. Sure. A coffee with milk.
His brain damage happened 10 years before I was born. I can't even imagine the shock, the effect that had on my parents. And it was, you know, particularly difficult for my mother, who, you know, lived at home with Christopher and, you know, really was just completely exhausted by the experience.
Dorothy McRae McMahon from the Commission for Mission.
Well, I said that when I ended the marriage, that was the hardest moment in my life, and it was. The second hardest moment was when I came out in public.
I am one of the people whose ordination is in question as we face the issue of homosexuality. So I ask myself, are people like me, by our very nature, people who cannot be bearers of word and sacrament?
I just remember standing there shaking, but nevertheless feeling a sense of deep peacefulness with myself and my God as I did that.
So all I can do is to ask you, my sisters and brothers, to make your judgment.
I think for many years Dorothy's realised that this day was going to come. I mean, she's never been dishonest about her sexuality. She just has chosen not to tell the whole world for very practical reasons. This was a day where she was just going to have to share it with the whole of Australia and the world. I clearly had to be prepared for some attention on myself, but I must say I wasn't quite prepared for exposure on national television. But of course I made that decision that we would face it when the time came. And I think Dorothy's incredible support of me through this process has been very helpful.
Let's get it dry. Oh. I was very excited when Mum came out publicly. One, because I was just very proud of her making such a strong, open stand, but also for myself it was a very liberating experience because it was something I more or less had kept pretty much a secret, particularly as most of my friends were in church circles. Have we finished dry? It's exciting. I mean, it is something that I have felt like just sort of almost announcing to everyone sort of, hey, you know, that's actually my mum, and it's a proud feeling for me.
Thank you very much for your welcome to me this morning. Welcomes are fairly important to me at the moment, as you might imagine. But I also always say when I am welcomed that I never assume in that welcome that everybody agrees with me. I simply assume that our oneness in Jesus Christ is greater than our differences. I've been very deeply touched by the support from the institution of the church that I have received, from parishes, from presbyteries, from ministers all over the country and outside the country. I was most moved by an invitation to preach at the South Woden Church in Canberra, and to find that there was a congregation there who still believed they could receive the word from me. That was a very special and heartwarming moment. I think you would agree with me that deliberate and intentional martyrs are usually most unpleasant. It is a big weight on my shoulders to feel the divisiveness, mostly because I've always been an approved of person in the church for all these years. I don't mean everybody agreed with me on everything by a long shot, but nevertheless I had been given a very senior position in the church because people had seen that I had gifts to bring to it. And now to sort of feel as though a whole section of the church thinks I'm some sort of terrible person is a heavy burden to bear. I do care about that, even though I still hold to my point of view.
The very fact that homosexuality is kind of elevated above most other sins shows that it's really the church and probably, society who's obsessed with sex. They can only see it in sort of dirty little secret terms. If my mother had had a shoe fetish, it would never have come out. Nobody would ever have cared, and it would quite rightly have simply been seen as her private affair.
She's done an enormous amount of work for the church that can't be denied, and all of a sudden the fact she's a lesbian takes precedence, and everything that she's done for the church in the past appears to just fade into the distance and be irrelevant. And for that I do feel angry.
There has been pain in coming out, quite a degree of pain. There's been the pain of receiving letters beginning "Dear Filth," and the pain of stepping into lifts with people who look upon you with hate. There has been the pain of the threat to my ordination. There is the pain of leaving my job, which I love and which I'd hoped to work on in for another year at least. But it's been worth it, and I would never decide to do otherwise now.
I think it is really very sad for the church that they can't find it possible to have a director of mission who is not a straight heterosexual person. But the church is the real loser on that. I found myself saying to people, you've been listening to television, you heard about what's going on in Western Australia? Yeah, that was my wife, or that is my ex-wife. So I've been quite proud to have some reflected glory from it.
Barry, I deeply respect as a very decent and loving and patient and good man, and one from whom I learnt a lot and who put up with a lot from me, and has been enormously supportive to me in many moments. I mean, he was one of the first to send me a fax of support when I came out in Perth, and I found that truly moving and quite special. And his loyalty to me through all the pains of all this have been quite extraordinary. It doesn't mean I didn't love him, because I did.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Hello. Happy birthday. Hi, Lindy.
The thing that gives me greatest joy is to see him happy with a heterosexual woman who I deeply respect. I mean, Sarah is just a great woman, and I look at him and I think, well, you deserve this. You waited an awfully long time for it, and I'm glad.
Haven't seen Robert on the way?
Before Mum came out, there was just such a lot of often unspoken tension and conflict and difficulties. It was a broken family anyway, really. So, no, it hasn't damaged us, it's enriched us.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lindy.
So when we do have family gatherings, the conversation's a lot easier now than what it was when we were all supposedly together.
As my mother would probably say, to look at, the God that is within us, the love that is within us, that's the most important thing.
I think that's the cheap one.
Well, I'm proud that she's sticking to her guns. I'm proud that she seems to be following her heart, which apparently seems to be a difficult thing to do in the church, even in these days.
The ramp into the car park, and this moment comes down.
It took an enormous amount of courage for her to do this, and things will never be the same for her. She can't go back. Dorothy always said, well, it's the hard thing is making the decision and doing it. That once the decision is made and it is done, one just lives with it.
Yes, Jen does Vic Foster's book. We've shared something very, very important together in a much deeper way than we had imagined we would. And also, we have some sense of being part of history, that in the end, both the world and the church needs to see very normal, healthy relationships between gay and lesbian people. The Bible says, the truth will set you free, and so it has.